Live streaming is on.
Okay, we're supposed to be live now, people. Let me just check with YouTube as usual to see if we are live. People, let me just yes, we are live. Sorry for the delay, as usual, technical issues. Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome back to Dialogos, the comic. We've been out for, I don't know, a month, something like that. I needed a rest, but public service announcement. You see this? See? Okay. Wear your fucking mask. You know what? There's something really important here. You can kill people. It's not about you. It's not about you being an asshole. You can survive this. Maybe you think you're young and important and impressive and strong.
Even then, you're going to have an inflamed heart or some kind of crazy lung problems, or maybe the back of your brain swells up so you're clumsy and forgetful. The long-term effects that they're finding now for people that are even healthy, even athletes, even young people, the long-term effects, 30% of athletes who get it have an inflamed heart 4 months afterwards. This is, even if you're a selfish asshole, put on a mask just so that you and your family try to avoid this thing.
For example, so see, I didn't need to go as long as usual with my public service announcement because Master Rick has helped me. So as I just said, wear your mask for your own sake, for especially for everybody else, okay? And with that, we say hello to our guest and good friend, Rick Remender. How are you, Rick? How's the family? How's everything in your neck of the woods?
I mean, you know, like everybody else, just enjoying like the best year of my life. It's just been tremendous. I wake up every day and I go, "What's new?" Whee! And I jump up. I kick my heels. I do a little heel kick, and I run outside and I go and I sing to everyone. It's always a musical in 2020.
Okay, so, what's the musical today?
Today was like I was singing to a bird. I was like, "Good morning, sweet birds," and they were like, "Chirp, chirp, 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 chirp," and a rainbow came out, and then like the milkman came by and did a little milk dance, and I had a top hat and a cane, and we danced together. It was pretty cool.
Did you guys jump over the truck or not?
Say again?
Did you guys jump over the trunk and dance over the truck or not?
All over the truck. Like the milk truck became a prop and we were on top of it in unison doing our things together. And then the neighbors drove by and got in. By the end of it, the entire neighborhood was in on the sing-song dance. And it was beautiful. And so I just wake up every day and it's like, great news. Fascism isn't on the rise. Great news. Climate change is solved. Great news. There's not a pandemic that your half-wit idiot president decided to let everybody get. Great news. And I just wake up and I go, yay, America. It's good times to be an American.
Yeah, well, you know, it could be worse.
It could be worse than being, sure, it could be worse. I guess I could be in the slums of Brazil. I mean, where else is it worse?
Okay. Okay, let me call Christopher Nolan. We have to tell him to shoot your milk truck dance in reverse.
You have to shoot what in reverse?
He has to shoot your milk truck dance in reverse.
That's right. Until I go inside and just go, oh.
Have you watched Tenet, by the way?
Say again. Have I watched what?
Tenet, the movie.
I haven't seen it. No. Is it streaming? I'm in this weird spot where all I can do is rewatch things that I'm very comfortable with that are old. So we've been rewatching like 90s Simpsons and Always Sunny in Philadelphia and just like, you know, now we're doing 30 Rock from top to bottom. We're just watching comedies from eras when things, though the Bush era was pretty rotten, it in contrast seems wonderful.
But that's another thing I was going to ask you. What's the thing you miss the most with these crazy times?
I had I've got a deal with, I got an overall deal with Sony, and I'm very fortunate in that they set me up with my own office and everything. And so Giant Generator had about 4 months before the pandemic, we had opened up a brand new office in Pasadena, California, and had just gotten it it set up and decorated, and art hung on the walls, and it was just starting to operate, and I was doing meetings, and I was developing, and I really enjoy, as somebody who spent so many years working alone in the house, I really enjoy getting out and being around people and having like a morning where you're like having coffee and talking and getting out of the house into a space. And then that was taken away just as I was like starting to really enjoy it. That was taken away. So I miss getting out and doing that. I think that the last 14 months have been extraordinarily terrible, kicking off with, anyway, let's not get me down the road of like, why everything is terrible.
Let's go back to it could be worse. Just remember that. Just remember that. You could be right now in a no. I would not say it. And,
I'm not. Look, it could be worse. It could. We are at. I'll be honest. I'm well. Things are okay. I'm in a better circumstance than most people right now, and I'm fortunate. So I'm not ungrateful for the place I find myself today.
Mm-hmm. So, do you remember the last movie you went to watch to the theater before this started?
I don't. You know what's interesting about it is that I was already sort of preparing for this my whole life. I've always been sort of a stay-at-home troglodyte, and I'd almost gotten to the point where I was like, the movie-going experience has become so unpleasant with people and their cell phones, and 25 minutes of commercials beforehand. That I just started to wait until things got home and watch them at home. So, God, it's been a while. It's been a couple years since I've been in a movie theater.
Okay, in your case, it makes sense, but it's happening to me. But I'm asking everybody the same question, and even if they went to a movie in March, they don't remember. It's like the pandemic started, so we are in a new phase of life, or whatever, the universe, if you want to call it like that.
Yeah.
So they don't remember. In your case, it's justified. It's 2 years, so it makes sense. But have you been watching a lot of TV, as you were saying? Anything modern, or just you're preferring to go back and watch all shows?
Trying to think of what. Oh, there's a show called Normal People that's on Hulu.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the most accurate representation of the awkwardness of falling in love and dating when you're like, 18, 19, 20, and the sort of turmoil of what that felt like. It's the most accurate representation I've ever seen of that. And so my wife and I watched that and really loved it. But no, I mean, I've been exclusively. I'm trying to think of any time I've got a huge list of things. Like there's Palm Springs that I'm supposed to watch and it's supposed to be great. There's the new Charlie Kaufman. Seth Rogen has The American Pickle on HBO. There's I Will Destroy You. There's tons of shows that I've been recommended, but I think the anxiety is so high that I just keep going back to comfort food.
Yeah, it's the same to me. And I was talking to Chaikin, Pacheco, and many others. And I guess because of the pandemic, we are all doing the same. You go back to the comfort. Like I go back to old TV shows that I loved, or I go back to old movies that I loved, that I know I'm going to love, and I'm going to have, a time that I don't think about anything else. Like, oh my God, I love this movie so much, I could watch it 15 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it also takes you back to a point in time that maybe wasn't so tumultuous. I think that, for me, it's been also with the kids. I want pure escape.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in any emotional place to deal with anything other than that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is we've rented a house away from the city a little bit because my wife has an autoimmune disease, and so we need to get away from everything, and the stress and anxiety of having to flee the house and do everything that we've done to keep her safe and to keep everybody together was also I'm in the midst of developing 2 TV shows as well as writing 3 or 4 books, and I was just to a point where the anxiety of sitting at home was so high I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't. We'd go out, like you were saying about the mask. We'd go out for walks and just try to get moving again. And half the people would not be wearing masks, and they would just be. They wouldn't be distancing, and you just look at the entitlement and the stupidity of it all, and it made me feel there's an American condition that I believe is a lack of community in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are so desperate to find a tribal community that as religion fades into the background, and that's no longer where the majority of people go to find their identity. Now people have sort of begun to use politics as their tribe and as their religion. And so you look at everybody's identity now, where it used to be, politics were important, but it was always like identity came from community, it came from religion, it came from ethnicity. I think now that's drifted into something where it's starting to become political parties. And in America, you only get 2. And so these people would be out there listening to their fool president and behaving in a way that was dangerous to others and mindless and entitled and earned them nothing. And they did it with such vigor that it made me lose any hope that America returns to a place of unification and community.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I'm living in north of Los Angeles, and it's still, it just made me lose so much hope, and trying to keep keep the disease out of our house, because it would potentially be fatal for my wife. And who knows, it'd potentially be fatal for me. I'm in my mid-40s. You just don't know. But that anxiety made working impossible. So, we rented a place and got out of the city, and we're feeling much better now. And I think that, watching things that were my favorites during different times, different eras, the Always Sunny in Philadelphia and the aughts, that show always gives me a chuckle, and I think it's really well written, well performed. And those first 10 seasons of The Simpsons, there's just things that are just like delicious comfort food that help sate that anxiety. And so between that and getting out of the city, I've been able to get back to work and get things moving again.
Yeah, what just told, there's something that I always use as an example. Maybe it's not the right metaphor or not, but I remember a conversation I had with some comic friends years ago in a bar in New York about basketball, and they were and the conversation was because Spain won the world championship, the US didn't in basketball, and I was telling, well, that's because we have the best team, and they were like, no, doesn't matter. We have the best player. And the conversation revolved about me talking about, the group, how sports here are seen as them. Even if you have a star, the most important thing is the group. If the group doesn't work, and the other side of the conversation, no, that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that they have the best. So for me, that was I interesting to say, this is a cultural thing. Even if we're talking about sports, for us, we're talking about community, and you're talking about who's the best.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the individual, in the sort of cult of personality that everybody's trying to build around them. I was talking with somebody, a filmmaker, about something, and he had put it really perfectly in that everything up until about 11 years ago, was filmmakers and entertainers and writers and comedians looking outward and talking about what they see, or filming what they see, or capturing what they see. Mm-hmm. And with the advent of the iPhone and this transition that we've seen, that camera was flipped into a selfie where everybody is I, me, I, and they're just looking at themselves, and they're rewarded for it, Mm-hmm. And the danger of that is that you don't build a community, you don't build a team, you don't build character in people where they're concerned with their neighbor with that sort of culture. And it's been getting worse and worse. And I guess that can sound like old man barking at the clouds, or it's somebody as a Gen Xer who's in his mid-40s and is in the middle of all of this. I'm between the boomers and the millennials. I was raised offline, but I was deeply online. I grew up with all of these things in my 20s and through now. Gen X is a unique perspective, and it's the last unique perspective, the last one. We were the last generation raised offline. And I can honestly...
You and me are the same age, more or less, right? I'm 46 now.
I'm 47, yeah.
So yeah, we're same generation. Believe me, I know what you're talking about.
So I believe, and nobody listens to Gen X. We've been swept under the rug, and nobody gives a fuck anyway. But I do genuinely believe that what we're seeing is the way community is dissolving, the way vitriol and partisanship are taking hold, the way tribalism based on politics is taking hold.
Yeah.
Is entirely a symptom of these self-reflecting pools, the social media, the me, and the lack of any sense of community.
Yeah. A friend that is a doctor, we're talking about, how kids, which also happens here, don't wear masks because they think they're immortal and all that. He said, this is going to sound rough, but the best thing that could happen for society is that somebody decided by law that the phones cannot have a selfie camera. Eliminate the front camera. Go back to only have the back camera. And I was thinking for like a while, and I was like, that's a really, brutal summarization of what's happening with society. If it's, you don't have to make the effort, but if you have to make this effort and do it, you are going to start doing it.
Well, there's, I've had this conversation with a number of people in theoreticals, and we've gotten into the weeds on it a few times. When I had my last studio, we would talk about climate change because we were all well read and looking at the models, which are all coming true, especially with global dimming because nobody's flying anymore. You're seeing California hit, Phoenix, Arizona temperatures yesterday to 121 degrees in Los Angeles. And, the mindlessness of the deniers and the greed of the people who feed these stupid, ill-informed people and tell them that they're right and it's American to, run your truck and to shit all over the world. And that we talked about, if the only solution to climate change was an authoritarian green regime that forced everyone to do the right thing, that rationed the amount of red meat, that made them get electric cars, and literally like almost like a fascist regime of environmentalists. But it would definitely rewind or save the planet for the next generations. Would we agree with it? And that conversation led to some really interesting stuff. You get into Huxley and you get into Orwell and you get into these ideas of then, does the green fascist movement become corrupt? And now they're allowing gasoline, but only for the high officials. And would you, sure, you want to get rid of this aspect of the phone that has made a culture based on narcissism. But in terms of like real, actual, hugely important issues, would we accept a green fascist regime if it meant the end to pollution, end to deforestation, and that within 20 years we'd have leveled off instead of melting the planet? It's fascinating because we're giving up freedoms and we're allowing ourselves to be dictated by a regime of environmentalist fascists in this fiction, but we're saving the world. And honestly, the part of this that gets fun for me is, in no way, shape, or form do we solve the problem without it. Mm-hmm. Because individuals will not make the right choices, especially here. Even making people appreciate just simple things like recycling. And now the reality is, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent.
No. That was part of the idea, But do you think that people would accept it? Because I don't think so. I think people is too precious about having their fucking burgers. You know what I mean? Even if they or the now, the short-term culture we have now, like, oh, we're going to save the world in 20 years. Like, I don't give a shit. I want my burger now, or I want, my high-engine car or whatever. You know what I mean?
the convenience factor. People will sacrifice their children and their grandchildren's futures to have convenience now. And in America, the problem I'm seeing is that you can't make people appreciate doing anything for anyone else. And that is a degree of greedy capitalism that is so run amok that you're looking at people who can't wear a fucking mask in order to protect the weakest. And somebody said, the greatest generation fought fascists so that the last of them could choke to death in a hospital because of them. And it's true. This is proto-fascism. This checks every single box. People would rather go with the idea that what they're doing is freedom than to care for the weak and the elderly amongst us. And then when you get into the science, like we were saying earlier, this goddamn virus doesn't care. Yeah, it's killing mostly people over 65. But when you look at the lung and the heart damage and the long-term cognitive issues that are being caused, this is potentially gonna cause a lot of disabilities across the entire population of this planet for generations to come.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, guys, this is for you again, the thing with masks. It's not about the elderly only. It's there's a lot of people that been reported is the science that if you get it, as Rick just said, you can have a lung condition for the rest of your life, and not a mild one. So just be careful. But let's go with comics. Let's change the subject a bit. Of all the chances you have, you've worked in a lot of fields. Why comics? Why comics is the special one in your heart?
I always go back to the same answer, and it's the purity of intention. So now that I've been fortunate enough to work on some really great features, and I got to make a TV show and show run it. I really love doing those jobs, and I love being in a large group of people and making something like that. But there's nothing quite like if I'm going to revert to the individualistic aspect of myself, which stands in glaring contrast to the lecture I was just, espousing. I think as an individual, as a creative, as an artist, comic books offer the ability to tell complex stories with no budget and with a purity of intention where none of it is filtered through a committee. Now, that's only true in creator-owned comic books. Marvel and DC are pure committee. And I think that the freedom that offers, as an old punk rock kid who, has issues with authority, I always thirsted for that. And so when I first started making comics in 1997, I made my first comic. I found that the freedom of it, and though it wasn't a good comic book, it was created from a place of me and some friends wanted to make a thing, and we made it to the best of our abilities. And it opened a door to me that I realized, I can do anything in creator-owned comic books. And so I spent the next decade working in creator-owned comic books, and I made 10 or 15 or 20 whatever graphic novels in those 10 years. And I kept getting good paying jobs that I would then I couldn't do it. I would work at these day jobs, and they're not bad day jobs. I mean, one of them I'm like, storyboarding for Electronic Arts, and then I'm working on some Simpsons. I mean, I was getting interesting jobs, but I couldn't make myself care about it when I knew that I could be writing and drawing things that were pure expression and would live forever, even though it was a much smaller audience.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think is so special about the comics language? I always use the same comparison, which sounds crazy to people, but I always say comics is the only art that can defy the theory of relativity, because you control time and space from beginning to end. And I don't think that's possible to do in any other art. Maybe in part, yes, but not as fully as the full control you have in comics, even because of the shape of the panels you use or the time you want to take, to stay in one place, move back and forth, etc., etc. How do you see about that?
Well, I mean, I hadn't considered it in terms of controlling people's. You're talking about pacing more than anything else on some level. Like you're talking about, like while you're watching a film or a television show, there's still time is still moving at a steady pace, even though they might slow it down and speed it up, and the information might come fast or slow. But in a comic book, if you do a 12-panel grid and then load it with text, you've slowed people down to a much different degree, I suppose. Yeah, I think that also there's a tactile, you're connected. It's why I don't think digital comics work the same way. I think that with a book, or it's why I go to such lengths and have to make these big oversized hardcover collections. I work with the best artists in the world, and I want that tactile when it's in one of those beautiful collections with that big thick paper, your tactile connection to the art. And in order to read one of those, you're probably on a desk, or you're not just on the beach and it didn't get crumpled up in your backpack. You're experiencing that. And I can't think of anything that can duplicate that. And I think it's more, for me anyway, yes, you're controlling the immersion, and you're controlling the pacing, depending on the amount of words you're using, the amount of panels, how quickly it's moving. But it's always, for me, been about like that tactile connection. And I suppose, like, I've talked to people about this, that on the iPad, they're still having a tactile experience, moving the panels around and shrinking them up and zooming them out. There is still probably an element of that. But I find that with the print comic book, when I really get into one, because I'm there holding the actual object, it's not on a TV, it's not on a screen, it's a physical tactile thing I'm holding, my connection to it is deeper.
Yeah, but it's also aside of the pacing, I was talking about also, in a script you can control. I always use the sample of Watchmen. You have in the first issue, you have Laurie in the back. It seems that it's not important at all, and then you go back on issue 5 and sees forefront, and with that, Alan and Dave are just telling you what I told you on issue 1. It's happening at the same time that what you're reading now on issue 5. That's what I'm telling you about the control on time. Of time and space. It's not only on the pacing. I think it's also, there's things you can only do in comics about that level of taking you to the moment in time I want, just with the subtlety of that. You know what I mean? Sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of different immersion tricks and things you can do in comic books, and I think that because you're holding it, reading it, your immersion is deeper. And so the level of Easter eggs and the level of things you can do to play with is deeper. I had written an outline for Fear Agent that was 18 issues when I first started. And so, the storylines that I knew were coming around issue 15, I started seeding that stuff much earlier. I think in a lot of other cases, it's very difficult, and I did that in the Deadly Class show. I set up what would be coming in seasons 2 and 3, but it's not quite the same payout. It's not quite until, even if you were to, have seen something in Sopranos season 1, episode 4 that paid out in season 3, it's so long between viewings and the immersion is so different. Whereas in a comic book, I had a lot of people that were like, oh, when that portal opened up in issue 7, Heath was seeing this person sending a message in issue 15. And I think the immersion's deeper, that people can more fully encompass when you do those sorts of things.
When you're talking about the tactile part, are you talking also about the constant cliffhanger that is the right page? That I mean, you pass on the page. How much do you think that is important? What's in that last panel of the right page?
It's the page turn is huge. One of the things that drove me so nuts about working in mainstream comic books is that you're not allowed the page turn. You can't control it. You don't know where the ads are going to go. Nobody cares. That part of it it's one of the joys of this. And you have this, like people who are writing in television or film don't have to worry about the viewer looking 30 seconds ahead while they're here. And if you're reading it and seeing both pages and the reveal is facing you while you're getting to the reveal, the impact is shot. Yeah. So you need that page turn, boom, and you need to plan your scripts. that's part of the craft, is to make sure that your flow is then reworked so that your page turns give you the reveals. And if you read any of my creator-owned work, that's the priority. The priority is to always give you the biggest moments on the page turns. And even if that means I have to, cut 3 pages to get there, or whatever machinations I have to do to make it happen. And if you're not able to control those page turns, you really I remember Uncanny X-Force. And if you haven't, spoilers, I guess, for a 10.
It's like what, 8 years ago?
This character Phantom X kills somebody surprisingly, and I couldn't make it happen on a page turn because I couldn't control any of it, and it ends up not being on a page turn. And you basically had to just give up the page turns. It just didn't matter. And so, sure enough, as it all falls together in the book, when it's eventually in a trade or a hardcover, the ads are taken out, then you can control it. But I had lost sight of that. So the big reveal that he does this, that he pulls the trigger, is facing you on the page. It's not a page turn. And it always drove me nuts. It always just drove me bonkers. So like, it's ruined.
Now that's what I was asking, because in your career own, for me, it's pretty obvious, that you're going for that, for the importance of the page turn. Also, when you work, of course, another thing that I noticed is that in any of your different books is that you write for the artist. You just don't write, as some other writers do, as they just write and not care much about who's on the other side. So how do you, when working, with, right now you just work with Luis La Rosa, or with working with, with Tocchini or with any of the others, how do you talk to them about what they like to do, what they like to draw, and what they don't? How is the process with them, in terms of who's going to do each book and what you like to work with them on? Well,
it's not an assignment, creator owned. I have an idea, and I approach artists and I go, hey, I've got an idea. And a lot of times when I approach artists, I'm approaching them with a number of options. I'll say, here's the thing about the artist, is they're putting in Tocchini's case, he's spending like 8 weeks on an issue now. And yes, I spent 10 days writing it and another 5 days agonizing over the beats and what the story is going to be and the emotion and the character resolutions and the arcs. I take it very seriously. I think Marvel style is some lazy bullshit. I do full scripts. But he's the one who's going to go in there and realize it. He's the actors. He's the director. He is the production designer. He is everyone else on that production. And if he isn't in love with it, then what Greg is doing is spending his life realizing somebody else's vision, and he's not passionate. Why become an artist? Go do anything else. There's a million easier jobs. And so when I approach an artist, I say, look, here's a few genres, here's a few ideas, I'm playing with this and this. In some cases, we'll end up mixing 2 ideas or taking from one and building on the other. But every artist has a fire to do a certain genre, or you can draw them into a fire. And if they don't have it, we don't do it. And so for Greg, it's like, for Wes Craig on Deadly Class, I know if I'm feeling like I want to do 12 panels and go slow, fast, big, small, and do a lot of what I call Mignola beat panels, where you see a little thing of like a hand touch a knife and then the big panel. And Wes loves it. Wes will get in there and he Jeff Darrow's it. He loves going Alex Toth and just paneling it up. Jerome will like in terms of Opeña, I've worked with him now for 15 years. Jerome will do 7. He'll get to 8, but he's not super excited about it. And so you realize, like, okay, Jerome is like more of like we hit 5 to 7, and then Tocchini, you can give him 10 panels and he'll figure it out, and he'll always do an amazing job. Or you can give him the 3-panel page with a lot of big stuff happening. Same thing. Greg really goes on both sides of it. Matteo Scalera, Like I would write him an 8-panel page and he would turn it into a 6-7 panel page. I would write him, a 3-4 panel page. He would turn it into a 6-panel page. Like Matteo loves, there's like a certain rhythm to how everybody tells story. You eventually get comfortable with that, and you have to write to it and you have to adapt to it. And that's the beauty of the creative process, is that you are two people collaborating together to tell a story. And if you as the writer think that you're the number one head honcho and that you're just giving scripts to these peons to make your genius come true, then you shouldn't be in comic books. And there are a lot of people with that mentality, and their comic books fucking suck because their artists are not engaged and in love with what they're making. And you certainly can't get 44 issues of Matteo Scalera or 26 issues of Greg Tokini or 55, 60, whatever issues will go to on Deadly Class of Wes Craig, or even 17 issues of Opeña. Getting Jerome to do that, he spends almost 4 months on an issue. You can't get an artist to dedicate that much time, blood, life energy to something unless they love it and care about it and want to make it. And so I always make sure that in the development process, we come together, we bond on the idea. I develop with them. I come to them with story ideas. They throw in sometimes, what if he was this? What if the visual looked like that? They get their visuals in there. Sometimes Jerome will start doing sketchbook and sending it to me as I'm writing the outline. And I'll go, oh, that character should be this thing. And I'll start merging them. So really, if you're doing it right, you're co-owning the property and you're developing it together and you're making something that hopefully feels like the people involved are in love and excited and not just making a paycheck.
Yeah, I remember that one of the things that I love when I talked to Grant Morrison is that he told me that I love the unexpected. It's like when, and Yannick Paquette confirmed the same story, which is in Wonder Woman F1, Yannick, just as a joke, he drew like a fish, just in the background. So Grant took that fish and gave it a story. Just because it was a surprise. And same thing with Grant and I think it was in Green Lantern. One of Shermanico, Spanish artist, told me the same thing. He just drew some soldiers in the back, some unknown characters, and Grant tagged onto that like, oh, that gives me an idea to tell another story.
You bet. And you can tell Grant Morrison is a craftsman who collaborates and cares, and he lives and breathes what's happening on the page, and he adapts to it. And I think that leads to a more fluid feeling book. Like if you're trying to plan everything up front and just give it to the artist and tell them, like artists are also creatives who are storytellers. They're just doing a different version of it. And if you're handcuffing them or removing their input because you're so worried that it has to be your vision, then, it's like telling actors that they can't improv a line. They have to do the take that you want to give them. And having done that, I can tell you the best take is not always the one on the script. The actor will live that character. And I remember, sometimes you would get on set on Deadly Class, you get a Benedict Wong. You give him do a throwaway, do your take, try your version of it. And you're like, oh, that's much better because it's more natural. It's more human. It's more in the moment. He's living the character in a different way than the script writer who was locked in a room trying to think of it. So it's always collaborative. And you can really tell that Grant's stuff lives and breathes that way. And that's why I think Grant he's, at least in my opinion, the best.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of a story that Jon Favreau told about, when they shot Iron Man, and that, the I Am Iron Man by Tony Stark wasn't on the script. He just, Robert Downey Jr. improved it, on set. And they were like, oh shit, this is much better. And him and Kevin Feige has said that determined how all the Marvel movies would be shot in the future. We depend on improv a lot more than any other people because for us, it was shown at the beginning. That's why it works. We have to depend on our actors and let them go crazy.
You have to let creatives be creative. You can't handcuff people. And if people feel handcuffed or they're being like, yes, of course you get the auteurs and their vision has to be seen through. But in my opinion, the best art always comes from, I take my work very seriously. For example, on most books, I am developing in most cases for years before we get to work. I am writing character Bibles and outlines, and I'm developing, and I'm thinking of arcs, and I'm thinking about what I want to say. And I take it seriously because there is a responsibility, in my opinion, to the people spending money on this stuff, that it not feel haphazard, and that I can tell when there's an intent to somebody's writing, and I can tell when there's no intent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a difference between having an intent and having thought it through and doing your craft, and then being rigid. And I think that if you can have your intent, you know where you're going, you know what you want, but then you allow the artists to play, and then you adapt to what the artist is doing, and that you take that rigidity out of the process and allow everyone involved to get creative and play around, that the art elevates every single time you do that.
Yeah, it's also I've already written a couple of things in my life, so I can have a real proper opinion. But as a mini writer, if you want to call it like that, I've always thought the best part of comics as a writer is the surprises. I mean, what you get back from the artist and you don't expect.
Yeah.
As you said before, with your own and a character design that is something pops in your head like, oh shit, I hadn't thought about that.
Yep. And look, I mean, that's the joy of it, because for me, when I'm developing, I love it. Like Tokini, I think there's a number of times Greg did that on low, where the designs came in and I would go, well, that's the greatest design ever. And it's a small piece of the story right now, but it can do this and this and this. And it should, because that design is wild and great. And the same thing with Jerome, was we were developing Seven to Eternity or Fear Agent, any of the things that we've done together. And even, the Uncanny X-Force stuff, he would always do something in the design that gave me a bigger idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that I would then build, it's sort of like, if you think about why Star Wars works, and not to get into a thing about it, but if you look at the first two Star Wars movies, which are frankly, let's face it, they're the only kind of two real movies out of those movies.
I was gonna say, interject, just saying, you mean the two good ones?
The two with words?
The two good ones.
The two good ones. I mean, look, I don't want to get a bunch of people angry at me. It's all opinions. We all have opinions. I don't care for any of the rest of those movies. Sorry. But those two movies, if you didn't have the art design that you had, the reason that it's also toy centric, and it speaks to our generation when we're kids, is those are the greatest designed characters ever. Boba Fett's not even a character. You have no reason to care about Boba Fett. Boba Fett's just the coolest looking design ever. So as a kid, you're like, God, what's that guy doing? He's so cool. And then you tell stories with him in the back of your head, and Darth Vader and the stormtroopers and the spaceships, and that stuff is like, I'd say like 70% of why that works is those amazing designs and that amazing aesthetic. Comic books are much the same way. My job is to make sure that what's on the page has intent, it has arc, the characters are true. I think my biggest job is emotion. And, the artist is doing so much of the world building and so much of taking you where you're going. My job is to make sure that where they take you, once you're there, you deeply care about the human beings involved and what they want and if they're going to get it.
Mm-hmm. That's the other question I was going to ask. From a writer's point of view, I think you just answered that, but going into more detail, what's more important for you, structure or emotion, character or explanation of things?
Explanation, like I'm a David Lynch guy, so I think plot is the least interesting. That said, I work really hard on plot. I make sure that there's a structure, but I don't let myself get on rails where the plot is hammering me. Like if I feel the least bit bored by those rails, then it means that I know where I'm going and I'm putting in fat that we don't need. And if I get to fat, I'll take a piece of dynamite and I'll put it on the train tracks and I'll blow them up.
Mm-hmm.
And the train goes over a cliff and into a ravine, and then I'll explore what's down there. And then I'll climb back up the cliff and get back on the track somewhere else.
Yeah.
But if I feel like I know where we're going, I know what's happening, if I'm the least bit bored writing it, I will take a detour, and I'll take a detour immediately. Because you have to sort of imagine that if you're bored, then your reader is bored. And if you're not emotionally invested, the things that I've written that have made people cry, and I have about 6 things that I traditionally have people come up to me and say, hey, wow, that really, I'm a grown man, that made me cry. I made myself cry while I was writing those scenes. I found the personal connection to those scenes and the things that I was dealing with, and translated that into the characters, and did. Those days are draining. I will lock myself in the office for 15 hours and I'll keep writing it until I get to like the truth of the scene, the emotionality of the scene, and trying to find that. And so if I had to pick what was the most important, I would definitely say that character and emotion are hand in hand, and that all of the rest of it can be found almost anywhere else. Now, obviously I'm working with A+ world-class artists who are making things that are exceptional in terms of visuals. But my job is to do what hopefully I can do in a unique way, which is take them to an emotional place that other writers cannot.
Oh, so let's go with people's questions, so they don't think we are ignoring them, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, Pedro de Mercader says, Rick, thanks for your work. I read that Illusions by Bach was a very important influence in creating Low. Has that author had an impact in any other of your projects?
I read Jonathan Livingston Seagull in the 80s, and of course, it's a beautiful book. But for me, when my friend and an old collaborator of mine, Harper Jayton, gave me Illusions in 1997, 96. And we were both working as animators on Anastasia, and we didn't like our jobs very much. But everyone told us we should stay because it's a good job, and we were young men with work. And not that I didn't appreciate that, but I found that it was not fulfilling, and I was crushed by the weight of it. So I read Illusions for the first time in the mid-90s, and it was almost like a religious experience for me, in that it opened me up. I was always an anti-conformist and loved the transcendental stuff, and Emerson and Thoreau and Walden Pond and all those sort of musings on removing oneself from civilization and removing oneself from conformity. But that book lit the fuse on me. That plus, a lifetime of listening to punk rock music, which is all sort of self-help, positive mental attitude, get out and do it, life is short, led me to quit that job and to chase down making comic books. Yeah.
So Pedro also asked, is there a chance for Deadly Class Season 2? Really enjoyed that season and the comic, obviously. How did the director Paco Cabezas get involved?
Well, first of all, season 1 has been buried from streaming, and we're in the middle of dealing with that right now. I have a sneaking suspicion that nobody got to see the show, and that it was only aired live on Wednesdays on a cable channel that was at a time when most people had moved to streaming. So I think when Deadly Class Season 1 finally finds a streaming home and people watch it, I think you're going to see that thing explode. At which point, I would, imagine there's a potential that we could put the team back together and do more. It's really going to come down to finding a way to get all the parties involved, to get it on a streaming platform and give it that chance. I couldn't be more proud of this show, and I feel sad every day that it's not available. People have to spend $30 to watch it. In America, it's funny because every other country it's streaming. I have fans from every other country constantly telling me, when season 2? And I go, well, it's not streaming domestically. And so anyway, I could get into the weeds on this. It's not, in my mind, 100% dead, because I know that it's so good that once we get it up on a streaming platform, it'll have a new life. And so we'll just have to wait and see. Paco got involved. He's just a high level genius, and and we were so lucky to get him. And he had read the book, and I remember meeting with him, and we got to work on, that was such a Maria-centric episode. And he got to shoot all those scenes with Maria and Saya and Brandy fighting the ninjas in the graveyard. And it was just like we both were kids going like, okay, we're going to get to make sort of like the Frank Miller comic we loved when we were kids. And we're going to literally have like classic old school ninjas come in and attack these three characters in a graveyard. And he was just, he's not only a wonderful person, but he's a high level genius. So getting to work with him on that stuff, boy, what a treat that was. I would love to get a chance to work with him again.
Just as a side note, I remember when Benedict was in a Dutch Comic Con a couple of years ago, I would say, or a year and a half ago. He was really surprised when everybody, from other parts of Europe, Spain, from the Netherlands, etc., we were all telling, it's in streaming. It's all around Europe. And he was like, why do you guys have it and we don't have it in the US? And I was like, don't ask me.
I literally sent out another bunch of emails yesterday. It drives me crazy because what happens is I'll get a bunch of communications. It's a huge hit in South America. It's a huge hit in all over Europe and in strange places, but especially in Spain and France.
In Spain, it was a huge hit. I can guarantee you that. Yes,
it's a huge hit. So here I am in America, and all I want at this point is for people to see the goddamn thing. And I have all these international fans. And like when I talk about the show locally, people are like, "Did that come out?" Like, oh God!
You want to kill yourself or kill somebody else?
It's just life. You can't complain. I got to sit with Joe Russo and get trained on how to make a television show, and I'm currently in a wonderful situation with Sony where I'm making 2 new TV shows. I'm working on one of my favorite properties, and I'm also working on a comedy, and I'm gonna make, I'm hopefully gonna make more TV shows. But Deadly Class was a dream because I loved everybody involved, and it was all like that cliche of like we became a family, but we did, and it was just this wonderful group of kids who were so excited and beautiful, and they were all just such wonderful people. And that one was like, I remember in the middle of it going, we were filming a scene towards the end of the season where Brian Posehn is a prisoner of the villain Fuckface, and he's being forced to do a hoedown dance. And we were filming it, and I was in the back of the set watching it, and Brian is dancing around, and there's all these hillbillies like playing a song that was all in Fuckface's head. And I remember thinking how happy it made me, and then that was when it hit me. I go, I can't. The fate's not going to let me stay this happy. I can't keep doing this.
Well, let's hope it changes. I agree with you. At the moment it hits in America, the moment it hits streaming, is going to explode.
I know, but I'm just figuring out the business side. So it's interesting. It's South America that people can't understand because it's such and same in parts of Europe and the UK and Canada. It had such a huge viewership, but I get into the business, but it's too boring. So
yeah,
anyway.
let's move on.
We can get it sorted.
Yes. So Dante Cotogrini asks, was writing the ending of Low harder given the state of the current state of the world, finding hope and such?
Fortunately, I've had the ending of Low figured out for a while, and yeah. But the current state of the world is a very fascinating one in that I've never felt more like, I hope people read Low. And we've got some really big stuff going on with Low, and I'm really excited for more people to find it. I've never bled more into something, and I found that writing the final arc in the midst of the turmoil that we're currently dealing with was a wonderful challenge to all my years in therapy, to turn my head into optimism while not putting on blinders and saying, like, I kind of hate the optimism where it's like, everything's sunny, or, it could be worse, or you did say that earlier. That wasn't enough. Sorry. Platitude optimism where it's like, stiff upper lip and pull it. I'm like, trust in tomorrow. I get it, but I needed something a little bit more philosophical to get myself through to find optimism. especially right now, even if, and so I definitely had a difficult time. I did not change where the story lands from the original outline, but I feel like writing about that perspective and writing about those characters in the current climate made the last arc. I always hate when people do this. I'm gonna do it anyway. I hate it. Every writer's like, I'm so proud of this one. Like, fuck yourself. Like, of course, I'm so proud of myself. Like, but I am.
I was thinking you were going to say, "Oh, it made the ending more poignant." Like posing like this. But okay, you're proud. We are going to allow you 3 proud moments. Okay, we need to.
Okay, one down.
You're 1, so you have 2 left. Okay, so Felipe Gonzalez says, Mr. Remender, I have read your work, and you have a special gift inside your writing. The topics you use, like science fiction, family, wrong decisions, etc., are very evocative and interesting topics, so thank you.
It's very nice of you. Thank you.
So, Pedro asked, any tip for long-term open storytelling, open structure storytelling? I find your stories always have great pacing and timing.
I mean, I think that's a product of the work that goes in up top. I do break most of my books the same way that you would break a television show or a cartoon or a movie. I break it, I workshop it, and I work it, and I work it, and I work it, and I don't write like Scumbag, for example. I started writing the Scumbag in 2017. I started writing Low in 2009. I started writing, anyway, I go through all these things, but I think that that's a product of intent. And I think that, like, though it's not financially rewarding, and I realize that there's a lot of people that just, sort of spit out words and shit things out as they go. I believe that the emotional integrity of a story resonates and lasts longer when people care enough to do the front loading work, and you can tell. I think people who want it and respond to that kind of storytelling, they can tell the difference between off the cuff, making it up as you go, and somebody who has intent and is taking you somewhere with purpose.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I always say the same thing. If the writer who thinks he knows more than his readers is doomed from the start, because they know, even from an instinct, from being reading all these years, they fucking know if you're playing off the cuff or if you have something in mind.
I agree. I mean, I go back and forth. I feel like mainstream comic books, if I can, shit on that for a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. I don't feel like there's much of that in mainstream comic books. I feel like knowing that process and knowing how hard it was the few times I managed to pull it off, I don't feel like there's a reward system for it. I don't feel like it's necessarily something that happens that much anymore. And not that I'm shitting on all of the work that's being done. There's a lot of great work, and I think that there's a lot of people who manage to probably, I think it looks like Tom King is given like 10 issues, and he gets to sort of build things the way he wants in that regard. It looks to me like Tom is somebody who's given that sort of like, okay, and he probably is sort of building that stuff out ahead of time. But mostly the monthly Marvel and DC books don't feel like they have that intent.
By the end of the day, it's all based on, I was talking to Mark Wolfman and some other classic writers, and they were explaining to me, and even John Bogdanov, like when they got together to plan, they planned 2 or 3 years of a book. So the intent, the ideas were all there planted for, to happen in 2-3 years. Now, basically, you're told maybe this book is going to be canceled in issue 4, or we have the budget for 10 issues. So how, as writers, how can you guys, in mainstream, how can you plan for 3 years if you're told that you're maybe not going to go past issue 8?
You can't, and you're punished. Like, the thing that I always do is try to get to the big stuff soon, because I always expect that an editor is going to come in and change things, or there's going to be a new event, or they're going to move me onto a new book when I was at Marvel anyway. And so I tried to like find a way to get there in the most concise way possible that still had an emotional resonance, and that was always the challenge. So like, for example, when I was on Uncanny X-Force, I was really very happy to be on Uncanny X-Force. When I took that in Venom, Deadpool and Venom and X-Force were considered 90s garbage titles, and nobody wanted them. You know, like I was not a golden child. That was Hickman and Jason Aaron. I was a piece of shit that they could maybe bring some artists in and you know, kick me around. And that's a fact. You know, I've talked to the editors who left that place. I know what was going on. And I knew that I had to take Venom and X-Force, which in 2008, 9, 10, and Punisher, these are things that are like relics of the 90s. Nobody wanted these books. These were not big titles. I had to find a way to write them to such an extent with such a degree of love and passion that I could take those and elevate them up out of the C level, B level where they were at, and try to make myself a name and survive. And I wasn't being supported very well during that. I would bring an artist in, and then, you know, the powers that be would try to take that artist and give them to somebody they liked better. And so that fight for me was one where the sort of situation that I found myself in was I had to work in my mind 10 times harder than everyone else because I wasn't going to be supported by the company. Mm-hmm. And I was fighting for my life, and I had 2 new kids. I had 2 babies, and I was there to try to, you know, survive at that point. I'd never really wanted to be at Marvel. It was just sort of the necessity of the moment. And what I did was, so like on X-Force, I wrote 3 or 4 years worth of stories, and I bled into all of it. And then it was a success. And so then they didn't own the X-Men characters. So they wanted me to move into the Avengers world where they did own things. And because the X-Men were still a Fox property at the time, they didn't want me generating all this new stuff and making hit books there. They wanted me to do that in the Avengers land. But now I've spent a year and a half working these stories, and they're all interconnected to what I'm doing. And so then those stories end up going over into Secret Avengers and Uncanny Avengers, which is a title I created to try to continue some of those stories. And the threads are all there. And I'm still really proud of that work, but they don't quite work the same way. So when you do plan out and try to do that work, it's very hard to let go of it because you've worked so hard and you want to tell those stories. But then when you're moved into whatever political machinations or whatever's going on, they might be shifting you into other things, and it becomes difficult. So then you have to, it's a lot of mental gymnastics, I found. Now, I've had conversations with the next generation that came up after mine, and they say that now they're just off the leash, and you know they're allowed to do all these wild creative things where, you know, I got punished for Frankencastle. My numbers tanked out. Nobody wanted innovation, weird, fun comics. They wanted Frank Castle taking down cocaine dealers. You know, like take that. And I just wasn't gonna write that. But so it's interesting that maybe the stage is different now. Maybe things have been shifted a little bit.
Yeah, well, you know, different bosses at Marvel now, so maybe, you know, CB is not Axel is not CB. I mean, I'm not disparaging anybody. You know, everybody has their own perspectives, I guess, and their taste.
That Axel was the one allowing me to make those decisions, and Axel was the only one who supported me in making those choices. Axel was the one who wanted to go David Lynch on it. And Axel was the one, to his detriment in some aspects, where, you know, when I came to them with turning, you know, the Falcon into Captain America, that it becomes a line-wide initiative, and now Thor's going to be a woman, and Hulk's going to be Korean, and then it started. You know, like it's all from a good place with you know, honorable intent. I don't know. I mean, when I look back on that stuff, I think Axel was the reason that you had the innovation, and you know, he's not perfect, and as bosses go, you know, I can if I look at it though, you know, from with a little distance, the reason the innovation happens is Axel, and it might not pan out financially in the end, and you know, however things end there. I'd already quit the company and walked away, but anyway, I'm going to start going dark if we keep talking about
no, but it's good, you know, because sometimes, you know, it's good to remind people that Axel is such a good editor, because he is. Sometimes people forget, especially after he was let go from Marvel, people forgot. And I constantly remind people about how good he was from Vertigo to Marvel. And he's always been a really, really good editor, and one of the best, in my opinion. So it's always good to remind people of that.
And an eye for talent and who he was. It was not like they're the powers that be didn't like me. They didn't like my voice. They didn't like me. And Axel at that time did, and he took a risk on me based on really enjoying, I think, Fear Agent and some of my other creator-owned work, and said, no, this guy can do it. And I think that there was a lot of people. I think Jason Aaron wouldn't have gone to Marvel. I know for a fact, based on the political situation and what was happening, Axel was basically the greatest Jason Aaron champion that ever existed. From the point where we were all coming up, Matt Fraction, same thing, and so it's complicated. It's all complicated. But in terms of in terms of the innovation and what we were doing, I'm pretty proud of it. I think that we did some cool shit while we were there, and we changed the landscape.
Yeah, but at the same time, for you, I guess a different mentality than for other writers. I mean, some of the writers are there and they want to be there forever because they're Marvel huge fans and that's their goal. But for you, it was just a step, right? You needed to do it, but you always wanted to go back to your creating your own stuff, right?
Yeah, my heart was always in my own work, and I think that it was when I took the Marvel job. I remember one time there was I remember when I got Venom. I don't care about Venom. No, full respect. I don't want any people upset at me. I don't care. It doesn't, I'm a grown man. Like the things I'm interested in are not superhero comic books, but it was and I said to myself, well, this is a job, this enables you to build your name and make more comic books. And if you're any good, you can take anything they give you and make it good. And that was what I had written down on a sticky pad on my computer for years. If they're going to throw Venom at you, or at the time, Deadpool, like before I did Uncanny X-Force, that was not a good assignment. And I will fucking absolutely take credit for revitalizing that character. I think that finding the passion in characters I don't care about and things that I didn't really want to do was the challenge, and that you have to look at any of those jobs and you have to look at any of those jobs as an opportunity where there's no bad characters, there's only bad writers. And so that's what I did. Now, I ended up becoming passionate about it because I would put myself into them and write them. I would, from Deadpool to Phantom X to Flash Thompson into, some of the Uncanny Avengers stuff with the Apocalypse Twins and Frankencastle. I was always finding an in and a personal way to try to, care about it. But I'm very, very much not fit for that company, the corporate structure, the politics that run it. I'm not meant for that place.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I don't know if you heard it, but Acuna is texting me. Daniel Acuna is texting me by WhatsApp saying, "Tell Rick I love him in secret."
He loves me in secret.
Yeah.
He doesn't love me in public.
I don't know. He's he's a loon. He's a loon. We both can tell.
Daniel's like one of those people that you meet only in comic books, who's just sort of he's like a clone. He's like he's a planet, and yet we just hit it off and naturally kind of connect in our approach and our philosophies and in our style. I think that some of those books we did together in the Uncanny Avengers is what we did in there was emulated in a lot of other books later on, and I think that book was ripped off a lot. And I think that what Daniel did in there is woefully undervalued. And in terms of the industry, what Daniel did in those Uncanny Avengers, I look back on them recently when the pandemic started and I was first locked in the house for a month, and I just was melting my brain at every single panel is such a goddamn exquisite work of art.
Yeah, it is. I agree. I have to agree. undervalued than it should be considered what it is, which is yes, I'm your agent, I can say this, Acuna, fuck you. It's a fucking masterpiece. I think he killed himself in that book. You guys both did, and I think that's a masterful book that deserves a lot more credit than it gets. Like you were talking about Deadly Class and not having it streaming in the US kills the book. And for me, like, I always thought it was never given the importance that it should have had, in terms of promotion, because that was a really big book. What you guys were doing, as you said, is being repeated because it was that good.
I'm very, very proud of it, and I think there's two I am proud of myself moments.
No, you have three. This is two.
I get it. I got one left. But the difficult thing in that is that when I went in and pitched it, I'm like, it's the X-Men and the Avengers. I could see the partisanship in America was getting so out of control. The rancor was going to become violent, and so the story, which is misunderstood and forgotten, even the opening with John Cassidy and I, was about what we're seeing in America right now. And I was right. And everything the Red Skull does in that opening arc is happening. Mm-hmm. The Red Skull, this is pre-Trump, but Trump comes in and taps into what the Red Skull does in that story. And then bleeding that into what Daniel and I were doing, I think that the difficult thing is that the pitch was, it was a metaphor for left and right coming together and finding a way to unify, but a million different ideas and perspectives that all conflicted with one another. And then what was interesting is I had right-wingers and left-wingers that would take ideas out of those and attack me. Like, oh, Remender must think this. Like, did you notice that every fucking character has a different perspective? You can't pick one and tell me it's mine. Anyway, get me started on fucking stupid people. But I think that at the end of the day, because it was the Avengers and X-Men mix in the Unity Squad, and it wasn't the X-Men or the Avengers flagship, people did not see it as driving the Marvel Universe. Mm-hmm. And with those titles, they want that importance more than they want a good self-contained story. And that was one of the things that was disheartening to me, to the point where I was like, oh, I don't belong here. I don't like that kind of storytelling. I don't want to do that kind of storytelling. Mattering to continuity is frankly a very juvenile mindset for me. And it's one that I didn't even really care about when I was a kid reading. I didn't go like, oh, that Storm from Thor showed up in Spider-Man. The worlds all connect. I just wanted to get back to that good story that I was reading. And the interconnectivity is like the least of my interest. The continuity is, oh, they made sure that this story lines up with the Hobblin' Goblin story from 10 years ago. Like, who cares? Anyway.
It's fun that you can find some characters in the other book.
Sure.
I think that's all. You shouldn't take it farther than that and thinking it's the linchpin of of creation. It's like, no, it's not. They just showed up in any other books. It's fun. That's it.
Yeah. If you were enjoying Walt Simonson's Beta Ray Bill, and Beta Ray Bill showed up in the Avengers, it wasn't like that story did anything to enrich the character or change the narrative of this great Walt Simonson epic you're reading. It was just that he was in the universe and he's like, he can run into Captain America. And there's like, kind of, as a kid, that's kind of cool. But when I'm to the point as a grown-up, and most of the Marvel audience that I was writing for are, late teens into their 40s, and all they're really concerned with is the continuity. And I kept getting hammered with that. Well, where does this fall in continuity? I'm like, I don't know anymore. Like, fuck off. Just read the story.
Yeah, the story is what it always should matter. What should matter is the story. By the end of the day, continuity is just a tool that you should be able, and I know you're going to agree with me wholeheartedly, you should just be able to take the continuity and say, I can use it, or you know what, fuck off with it.
That's right.
You're the writer. You have to have that choice.
Like if I could go on for hours about this because I found it so frustrating. Like I think Uncanny X-Force, I didn't take any of the Apocalypse mythology except for like a few kernels. Some of the original Walt Simonson, Louise Simonson stuff ended up in there. And the rest of it was like reinvention and rethinking of it, fully prepared that the next person is going to rewrite it and ignore it as well. But I think that's why it becomes a better story. Instead of just trying to follow the tracks that somebody else laid down entirely, which, like I said, if you're, when you're on tracks, and I think you said it too, the readers can feel the intent, they know where you're headed. if it bores them, then you gotta take them off the rails.
Yeah, absolutely. Pedro says, please, he wants you to pick between your mom and your dad. Please ask him if you can, which one of your books is I'm a new reader. He thinks I shouldn't miss. I will answer all of them. Just buy all of them.
They're all very different. I would say right now the thing that I'm, very personally involved in or personally in love with would be like, Low or Death or Glory, because both of these stories are what I wrote this year towards, I'm ending Low and I ended Death or Glory. Death or Glory is a lot about, my father passed away last year. And Death or Glory is a lot about the fight to keep him alive. And Low is a lot about the fight to stay optimistic in a world that seems hopeless. And both of those, like the last issue of Low is coming out here next month. Both of those you can read the entire story, beginning, middle, and an end. So I'd say right now those are the two that I would recommend. But Fear Agent, Seven to Eternity, Deadly Class, Black Science, like I pour my ass into all of them.
Yeah, he's only allowed 3 self, so I'm going to do it for him. All of them. Get all of them. He didn't say it, I say it. So you still have the 3. Felipe Gonzalez says, I love Black Science and the Art of by Mateo Scalera. Did you always have the ending in mind from the beginning? I like it and think it has different levels of reading and a hidden message beyond this, beyond the one we can see in the surface.
Mateo and I think around we had 5 endings. And at one point, we were going to do 5 different issues in the same cover. So no matter which one you grabbed, everyone got a different ending. But then I realized that would be like it. So it was like the multiverse, right? It was like depending on which copy you grabbed, you got a different ending. But I realized that there was such an emotionally unsatisfying thing about that. And so Mateo and I spent, and I'm not exaggerating, it must have been a year and a half. We would do Skype calls. And we would just stay up all night and talk it out and talk it out and talk it out. And we were like, well, how do we use all 5 endings? And I think that by the end, we cut 2 of them, merged another 2 together, and then had the 2 endings. And then found a way to loop those in together so that the story is infinite and goes on forever while still giving you a happy ending and a sad ending. And when we landed on that, I remember feeling I went for a run the next morning, and it's not often that you get self-satisfied when you hate and self-loathe as much as I do. I remember feeling like, oh, we're going to land this fucking plane. Like, this is going to be a really great ending. And It was a year before we were even going to do it, and I was so excited to get to it. And I know that, like, if you put in the time, if you bleed, if you write, we must have written 100 different versions of that ending. Mm-hmm. When you put in that time and love and you finally find that good idea, and I'll go on a little more long-winded here because there's something John Cleese said, that when they were in the writer's room for Monty Python, that there was the sketches that lived forever. There was 2 groups of people. There was the people that would get the fire put out and go out to the pub and have a drink. And there were the people that would stay in the room until 5 a.m. until they had the best idea. And he called it the fire. As a creative, when you have a deadline, you have a fire. And it's very nice to put that fire out. You're like, done. But what we often do, what hacks do, is it's so uncomfortable to live with that fire that you just want to put something out and be like, okay, covered. But the true great ideas, and Lynch talks about this in The Big Fish, they sit there with that fire and they just live with the fire, and it's burning them, and they're uncomfortable and they're angry, and that fire, I just want to go see my family, and there's the fire burning. And John Cleese said that all of the long-lasting Monty Python sketches were written by teams of people in the troupe that lived with the fire the longest they possibly could and found the best idea possible. And I always use that as sort of a gauge. Are we live with the fire as long as you can until you have gone through so many options that you're sure that the idea you're using is at least the best of the 100 you've cooked up.
Yeah, some other way to say that is that it's gotta burn until you find the solution, right?
But a lot of people will put that fire out with the wrong solution just to have it done. And I think that's the difference between good writing and bad.
I don't think Grant or you or any other or Alan or any other big names haven't lived with the fire. You need the fire in your hand to get to the good story.
You got to live with it until you have the right idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Matteo and I worked ourselves to death on that one, and I'm glad that it resonated. I feel very proud. Like, I'm always aiming for something that I feel like, if I could ever get David Lynch's attention, like, what would Lynch be proud? Would Lynch think this had any merit? Like, you know, and something that had multiple levels. And I think that what we did on Black Science achieved that. I was self-satisfied, number 3.
Okay, I will give you 2 more. But don't tell anybody. I'm just giving you 2 more. Just take it there. Tito James says, question for Rick. I hope not for me. How are you able to tell original stories okay, this is a weird one, in pre-established genres like sci-fi?
Well, I mean, genre is a backdrop, right? What's interesting is that in Fear Agent, when I was developing it, I realized that you could take the outline that I wrote and break it up into all the genres you wanted. And so, much in the same way that EC comic books was all genres, Fear Agent jumps from science fiction, and then it goes into a World War II style war story, and then it goes into something that's sort of a Western. I mean, you can jump through the backdrops and still basically tell the same story. Science fiction allows you more tools and more options. Being in a Western has its own set of rules. So really, genre is sort of a box that comes with a list of rules, because, you know, you can't, if you're in a Western, people can't communicate from one side of the city to the other. There's no phones. They have to send a telegram and go to a place to get it. So the rules of the genre, the rules of the era, they inform story to a degree. But at the end of the day, a character that that resonates, and heart and philosophy and ideology, those things that when you're achieving them, that come across, if you're doing it right, you're using genre to inform those things and make them better. And that's kind of like it. The rest is just sort of aesthetic.
It's by the other day that the genre is the backdrop, but the emotion and the depth of the character is what should set the story apart, right?
Yep.
Okay, so Pedro Mercader asks, when do you find the heart and the truth of a story? In the beginning, when you're creating it, during the process, or when it's done?
The heart and the truth. I think it's like different. I know that in something like, for example, like in Tokyo Ghost, I know that I wanted to write about codependence, and I wanted to write about tech addiction. And so, you know, the same way that codependence exists in relationships with alcoholics and drug addicts, I think that tech is our new drug. And, you know, not the first person to say this, obviously, but I wanted to write about what a codependent was like in a tech addiction situation. And then also we wanted, you know, Sean Murphy wanted to draw certain things. And so we spent, you know, a few weeks on the phone mixing and matching and figuring out, you know, and then I went off and wrote this. So I knew what I wanted to say. I knew what the heart was. I knew what low was. I knew what low was about. Low was about trying to hold on to a positive mental attitude and to see the good in life, but not through platitudes, and to do so even in the worst circumstances. Black Science was about how easy it is to lose sight of what's important, and how easy it is for work to take over life while your family is falling apart. Cautionary tale, you know, something that I was writing. It never happened. I've always prioritized my family, but I was worried that it was close to happening. So Fear Agent's about, a lonely, desolate, hopeless alcoholic who has to somehow get up time and time again and keep pushing forward. And Strange Girl's about somebody who doesn't understand religion and why they're being punished for religious beliefs that they don't hold on to. There's a million, sort of themes and ideas. Death or Glory is about a young woman who's going to incredible lengths to try to save her dying father. And that was me dealing with my wife's struggle in the healthcare system and my dad who was sick and dying. And so you're always looking for that before you start, and then genre and everything else kind of snap into place, and you explore a lot of that as you're writing, I think. But you got to have that bedrock before you go.
Mm-hmm. Dante Cotogrini asks, who was your favorite character to write in X-Force or in Marvel in general?
I'd say Phantom X.
Mm-hmm. And he also asked, will you ever work with Tony Moore again?
I don't think so. I don't think Tony's doing comic books anymore. I don't know. Yeah.
No, I'm not sure either, also, to be honest. Has an artist ever disagreed with where you wanted to take the story or what you wanted to do with a particular character?
Has an artist ever deviated?
Disagreed. Well, you send the script and, hey, I disagree with where you want to take the character or what you want to do with the story.
I think that the beauty of that is that I always look at any sort of challenge to that as an opportunity to debate the story. And any opportunity you have to debate the story is an opportunity for you to see if whether or not you really truly believe in the idea and if you can defend the idea. And if you get into those debates and you realize that you're flimsy, either you get rid of the idea or you rework the idea until you're not flimsy. And so debating with, be it an editor or studio and network or producing partners or artists, debating the story, you better be okay to be questioned. You better be okay to arm wrestle. And if you can't defend it, you got to have that voice that says, they're right, this is flimsy, you can't defend it. Mm-hmm. And either go back and fix it or get rid of it.
And turning around that question, has any of your characters, example, Greg Rucka told me this story, he was doing one of his Atticus Kodiak novels. He had the first arc, second arc, everything was going smoothly. He got to the third arc and suddenly the characters started talking back at him saying, no, this is not what I could do. This is wrong. Stop it. So he had to redo the whole third arc of the novel, after 1-2 weeks of full crisis, or like in full depression because nothing worked. Like, what it is as a writer, And he was like, until, it finally clicked and it worked. But it was literally the characters fighting back at him saying, this is not me. This is not what I should do. Has that ever happened to you?
Well, sure. I mean, that's living with the fire, right?
Yeah.
And the fire is you don't have the right idea yet, and it's burning you, and you're depressed, and your life is on hold, and the fire is like a pain in the ass, but you don't have the right idea. And I mean, I would never say anything as flowery as the characters talk to me, but I think that in terms of once you get used to the characters and you kind of understand who they are and how you've concocted them, you definitely understand what they would and wouldn't do. And I find that that's a fascinating aspect of it. And the longer you live with a character, the more that where that character will and will not go. But I like arcs, and I like characters that change, and I like characters that grow and learn and adapt. And what's interesting is that I think some people are so used to sort of like the sitcom version where the character just is the character throughout.
Yeah.
That when you start changing things and the characters learn new behaviors or they try new things like humans do, readers can get really upset by that because in their mind, those rules have been twisted. That character wouldn't do that. And I can always say, like, see the ladder they took to get there? This is called an arc. They're changing. They started angry. They ended up happy, whatever the arc is. So really, it's you got to do. I have a character worksheet that has 500 questions that you answer, and then you get like a deeper understanding once you answer them, who the people are and what you're writing about.
Yeah, when when especially superhero readers, when they get angry about some character changing, etc., etc. I always go out to them and tell them, then you like to live your life in medium shots. And what do you mean with medium shots? Go see a comedy. It's all shot here. My camera doesn't move. Things don't change. That's your life. You want your characters to be medium shots. And when they realize, like, oh, no, that's not what I like, that's what you're asking your writer for. You're asking them for the characters to not grow. That's not real.
No. But there's a reason that Seinfeld does it. There's a reason sitcoms do it. There's a reason that there's a reason so much entertainment is built on that. There's a reason people like McDonald's.
Yeah.
It's familiar. They know what they're going to get, and it doesn't change. I'm going to go in. I'm going to get a chicken McNugget, a Diet Coke, and a small fry. It's what I've always gotten since I was a kid. I know what it is. I get it.
Yeah. It's the comfort zone, as you said at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
People like their comfort zone, and if you take them out, which I think, to be honest, and to all of you, I say the same thing. I always say it. I think part of your mission as a writer is to take people out of the comfort zone.
I do too.
And
but not everybody wants that, and it depends on where you're at. Like right now, fortunately, the thing I'm writing, the TV show I'm developing is a comedy. And I got to thinking about that. Like, I usually like that as well. Like, I like to make sure, again, that's very much what I learned from studying David Lynch. And he is like the guy that I respect the most in the world, is that, you're never in a comfort zone. And he doesn't give a shit about like traditional structure or plot. He's going to take you on a journey, but there's always going to be something underneath it. He's always saying something.
Do you know Peter Greenaway?
Who?
Peter Greenaway. If you're such a big fan of David Lynch, you should meet the British version. It's not exactly that British version of David Lynch was Peter Greenaway. It's literally a guy who doesn't give a shit about traditional structure. He paints with movies. The Cook, the Thief, his wife and his lover, or Drowning by Numbers, or The Belly of an Architect. If you don't know it, you should. Literally, because it's like the traditional storytelling. The really crazies for traditional movie storytelling hate him like you can't imagine, because he's exactly the opposite. He doesn't give a shit about what you think is a structure. He's telling you, I'm a painter, I'm painting a movie.
And that's a lot of what Lynch does too. I'll have to. That's great. I need some stuff to watch that isn't just the same comfort food. I'll go check that out.
This is not, believe me, this is not comfort food at all. It's just, if you like this, you're gonna love it. You'll tell me later. Anyway, Gore Vidal says Garth Ennis in a 2014 interview said he only continued working for Marvel, doing the occasional Punisher books, because of Axel Alonso, who understood what he was doing and would always defend him.
I mean, look, sensibility-wise, like Axel and I don't see eye to eye on everything. And by the time I left Marvel, we had I was just the whole structure of that place. And, I understand what he was up against. I understand the powers that be and what we were trying to do. I just got tired of I used to call it, working at Marvel was trying to hit a good idea through a bad idea goalie. And you were constantly trying to shoot good ideas and innovation and new things through to benefit a corporation that didn't benefit you at all. Like, I remember, one of the things I fought for was basically turned into it was verbatim turned into the end of Avengers End League. And I remember going and watching that and remembering the fights that I went through as if I was some kind of like an idiot. This isn't Axel at all. I'm just ranting now. But I remember seeing the end of that movie and going like, oh, I wrote the end of that movie. Those are all my ideas. And they were all difficult to get through in the room. Mm-hmm. They were all kind of battered away. And it took some cajoling and some arguing to get those through. And then, Deadpool Part 2. They took a lot of what I cooked up with Axel when I was doing Uncanny X-Force and turned it into that movie. And you realize that you know what, I'm going to stop because I'm going to go dark. I don't want to.
Yes. Let's move on. Nergeek says your X-Force run is probably the best. Did you have total creative freedom to do anything for the violence of in terms of the violence of the characters?
In terms of the what of the characters?
The violence.
Violence.
Yeah.
Interestingly, that was the least appealing part for me. I wanted to do like the Fantastic Four and the big Kirby stuff, and I'm glad I didn't, because I ended up getting to use my ideas for those things, making my own books. But when they assigned me, Axel had me throw him some ideas, and we talked about Uncanny X-Force, and I was a kid who grew up on the Claremont X-Men, so I wanted to write the X-Men, but they didn't see me as good enough. They saw me as sort of like, shit on the bottom of their shoe, and I could have like what was considered the B and C list books always. And so the challenge for me was to take X-Force, which with a premise that I hated. It's the X-Men, but they're murderers, and I'm like, oh, cool, capital punishment X-Men. And I realized, like, well, then I'll just make it a story about like why capital punishment doesn't work, and I'll make it a story about why that violence ultimately just has consequences, and that it gets you nowhere, and it just corrupts the people doing it, and it just leads to more violence.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I realized that, like, take the premise of the thing that you hate, the extreme X-Men, like they're gonna get out there and murder, and then use that as a way to talk about what's wrong with that. And so I was never held back from the violence. And I tried to make sure that all of the violence had major ramifications. And if you look at the book and you look at the story, everybody that deals in violence and all the violence that's done lead to worse conclusions. Nothing good comes from any of the murder that team does. And that was the point of the book.
Yeah. Blake Royval asks, Rick, who's your favorite writer? Love your books. Thank you for all the great reading.
I think Grant Morrison in comic books is the guy that most inspires me. I think Grant has always been the one where he delivers what is advertised. You can say that there's the sort of mysticism, cult of personality, thing going on with Grant, but I think it's earned in the books, in the brave choices. I think that there's an inherent genius and smarts. There's emotion, there's imagination, there's craft. I think Grant's probably the best this industry has ever seen, for me, in terms of, if I had to go down and just pick one, I'd land on Grant.
Yeah. What about your favorite TV or movie writer?
Lynch for film. I think that there's something about the freedom. TV is a tough one. I'm a pretty big fan of the golden age of the aughts, starting with The Sopranos, and then moving into, I think the aughts were such a decade for television. Mm-hmm. Mad Men, Breaking Bad, comedies like Always Sunny and 30 Rock. Yeah, as soon as I'm asked to make a list, my brain shuts down. But in terms of like, I'm just trying to think of like what I've rewatched the most out of that stuff. And I'd say that The Sopranos ends up being the thing that I've rewatched the most out of all of those things. The Wire is, obviously up there, but The Sopranos is the one where they bury the lead enough where you allow the viewers. David Chase always wants the viewer to be figuring out the emotions and to figure out the complexities of what's happening, as opposed to a lot of what is done where they hang a lantern and make it so bright and clear that like there's no interpretation. So I think I probably enjoy most people who allow me the ability to interpret things, and I always try to leave that in my own work as well.
Yeah, every time I'm asked about TV, I always go back to David Simon. Like the average, his batting average is so high, in my opinion, that I love any others, but if I have to pick one, I have to go with Simon.
Yeah.
Let me see. Comic Crack says Greenaway is such a great director. Thank you. Yes, he is. That's why I'm recommending it to Rick. And it says Lynch has something to say that I saw recently about answers in art. He says there's not always answers in real life. Why would people expect them in art?
Yeah. It's complicated. I mean, again, it's comfort. And the more reality you give somebody, there's that NWA line. They want, you give them reality, but they'd rather exaggerate a little fiction. Like I think that reality, when most people turn to their entertainment, they don't want the true ugliness reflected. And it's what Lynch is doing in Blue Velvet, right?
Yeah.
It's a love story by two young people who are in love. But it starts off with dad mowing the lawn and he has a heart attack, right? And then you drift underneath dad into the grass, into the dirt, and there's bugs and beetles and worms. And he tells you right then what Blue Velvet's about. Blue Velvet is about what is underneath the veneer of the suburbs and what is on the outskirts. And I experienced that in life. I've run across those Dennis Hopper characters, I've known those kind of scary, dangerous people. I've been in situations with them and I've lived it. So there's a reality that is underneath the veneer of the American suburb. There is ugly human things there are worms. And so I just think it's a comfort thing. Not everybody's in the mood to have that reality reminded to them all the time. Sometimes people want to watch Friends, and the reality is, me and my 6 beautiful friends have coffee, and boy, who's going to have sex with who?
Well, that's true, of course. People need their comfort. But what I think makes our era, I think at least, I don't know if you agree, like the golden age of television, I agree with that thought, is that we're getting a lot of creators that don't want to give you the comfort food. They want to push you and say, even if you don't like this, you need to watch it, right?
I think that it starts in film with with Generation X doing finally getting cinema and only having it for a couple of years with Fight Club and Being John Malkovich and The Matrix. Yeah. And then it bleeds into around the same time into television, with The Sopranos and even The Shield and even what I think
and all those, yeah.
Yeah, FX and AMC and HBO, they all come together, and that's very Gen X. That's all very Gen X. But it's also like I was talking with somebody who said they're not all anti-heroes, but there is reality and texture and ugliness. We all wanted to tell the story. Like Fear Agent is very much Barfly in space, right? It's about a hopeless drunk who's floating listlessly, trying to just find a reason to stay alive. The millennial generation, at least the latter version of them, maybe because they're born in a time when they're watching, the World Trade Centers collapse, and they were kids at a different era. They don't want that in the same way. That our desire for that gritty ugliness and that sort of textured approach to the, and I don't even like the word anti-hero because it's not, but I guess it's hard not to say that like Don Draper and these characters have, Walter White and Tony Soprano and the characters that explode in the aughts. That's all, I think that's all very much Generation X and our sensibility, right?
Yeah.
And the last 10 years, you get much less of that, but you're getting way more experimental and interesting things like Atlanta. And anyway, I'm drifting, but yeah.
No, but by the end of the day, I think that's a perfect definition because generation before us, they wanted their heroes or anti-heroes. But what we got with The Sopranos and with Lynch and with many others was the nuances of real people, finally on TV. Finally, it's like, this is not a hero. This is not a villain. This is not an anti-hero. He's a human being with fucking flaws.
That's right. A complicated character. It's funny because I'll have people, I got attacked once online, and I love blocking people now. I didn't used to. And I would try to hear these criticisms where all I write are like, dick men. And I went through it and I was like, well, I was writing Strange Girl when there were no other books like that in 2004 and 5 and 6. And Low and Death or Glory. And I go through the list. I'm like, and even the ones where you could say that it was, like Heath. Heath is just a good old country boy from, he's in Austin, Texas, left leaning. I mean, you look at Grant McKay. Grant McKay's story arc is he starts off as sort of a workaholic who was a victim of abuse and abandonment. And so he's abandoning his own family, as those kinds of people do. And then by the end, he's a hero, and he's off trying to just put everybody back together and save everything. Okay. So I think that, like, what you hit on there is what all of these characters are, is hopefully an examination of quality, both flawed and ethical. You know, and no one character should carry one bucket. I have a black hat, and I'm going to take your lady and put her on the train tracks. Like I'm a mustache twirler. It's the cliche, right? And you're supposed to avoid that. But I do sometimes feel like, unfortunately, in comic books, with a generation, with generations of people built on superhero books, once you get into that nuance in comics, I think that there's a large population, and it's growing, of people who appreciate it and want it. But I still think that there's some there's some leftovers from the old thinking where I want Green Lantern, and I want Sinestro, and I want the one to be good, and I want one to be bad, and I want them to stay that way. And maybe not big fans of the nuance.
But at the end of the day, they couldn't stop. Marvel, in a way, was the start of those nuances, in the 60s compared to what DC was. But I always say the same phrase about that kind of people, which is, I'm sorry, guys, you can't stop the future. Whatever you want, keep the status quo. You are fewer and fewer by the day. The other readers keep growing. Rhino Tegelmeyer has 1 million, copies sold per book.
Mm-hmm.
Batman has 80,000. That's the real audience we are looking for.
That's right, and I think that's where Image Comic Books is gonna be the one that stands out in the next 10 years and takes over, because all the work we're doing is evergreen. You can suggest anything that anyone has been doing there, and there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and there are either there may be 1 volume, 2 volumes, or 10 volumes, whatever it is that the person decided to do. But they are evergreen, and they're like, you can give death or glory to any kind of person. It's a movie on paper. It's basically, if you like Convoy and you like car chases, and you like 70, any of the amalgamations of genres and things that you can mix together here, those books last, and they can bring new people in. You cannot bring new people in with Detective Comics number 7 billion, where it's like Batman and his 7 Robins, and this Robin was Red Robin Hood, who died once, and the other Robin is his 5th cousin Jake Drake Scam, and he's a good Robin. And then there's Damian Bad Robin, and he's a Rim Ram Robin. You got to go back and read 10 years ago when sorry, that's not the future, and people are not interested. My kids don't care. My kids read Raina, they read Dogman, they'll read Teen Titans Go. They're 9 and 11. I raised them in a house with comic books and graphic novels everywhere.
Yeah.
I was working on Captain America, and my son could kind of care. Kind of.
Nah, ignore that. That's saying your microphone is noisy. Just ignore it.
So yeah, it's. I believe that you're right. Somebody online recently was tweeting, saying that it's why manga is so accessible, why it's going to take over. You can get in volume 1 and read up to volume whatever, and that's the thing. Trying to get anybody into superhero comic books now, let
me interrupt here with a funny story. Every time I get asked by Americans, what's the biggest sellers? DC Comics biggest sellers. What is in Spain, for example? They expect I'm going to say Batman or Superman. As no, Sandman, Preacher, 100 bullets. Like what? Yeah. Books that have a beginning, a middle, and end.
An intention. I mean, look.
They keep wrong. You can do every year, every 2 years, going to have a new edition of Preacher, a new edition of 100 bullets, a new edition of Sandman, a new edition of Why the Last Man. Blah, blah, because they keep selling, and every new generation, you know what? Every new generation is going to buy them. Because
That's right.
as you said before, they're evergreen.
They're evergreen. You can give anybody the Watchmen and go, you don't have to understand anything. Just read that. You can give anybody Sandman. You can give it. And look, I mean, those were lessons that I think that, I saw those sorts of things on the writing on the wall very early on. I know, like, some of my Marvel work may be and I tried to make a lot of it evergreen, where if you read my stuff, it all has its own little connectivity. It may last, it may not, but I know that, like, we go, 2020. So Fear Agent has been in print for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, we're working on the TV show right now with Seth and Amazon, and but I keep Fear Agent in print every couple of years. I put more printings of Fear Agent out, and they all sell, and people want the hardcovers, and it keeps doing. I mean, we just put out a French and a Spanish edition of the Fear Agent Omnibus just last year.
Mm-hmm.
But how much of my Marvel work is being collected in oversized hardcovers in foreign editions? Maybe Uncanny X-Force will have that sort of longevity, but all of the rest of it, all the creator-owned stuff, from Strange Girl to Low to Black Science to Tokyo Ghost to Seven to Eternity, the Scumbag coming up. These things, if you do them well and you give them all you have, I have a saying: if I give it love, it will find friends.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give it love and you own it, and it's a self-contained thing, then we are helping comic books and graphic novels move out of this place. And don't get me wrong, I don't want anybody to think I'm vilifying the Marvel and DC continuity readers. That's just a whole different thing. It's harder to get people involved. The continuity determines what matters. And all the work I did back then got in a hurricane of continuity and is lost 10 years later. It feels lost. It feels like it was a waste of time for the most part. Whereas work I did before even going to Marvel is still alive. I'm developing a TV show for a couple of these things. I've got new hardcovers in print all over the world. There's a difference. And I think that we can all see that when we put our time and energy into our own work and give it our best, and quit thinking about that Spider-Man matters more than the character comes out of my heart. The thing that I create matters more than fucking Spider-Man. It's not about recognizing that telling people, like, I worked on Spider-Man. You and a billion other people. It just doesn't fucking matter. But what matters is what you created out of your heart and out of your mind, and what did you leave behind that's yours? What's your Preacher? What's your Watchman? What's your 100 Bullet? What did you make that's going to stand the test of time as an evergreen story that's the best of your ability with all your love and energy into it?
Mm-hmm. Dave Da Silva, you just had your question answered before you asked, because he just asked about Fear Agent. If you can talk about the Fear Agent live action series.
It's going to be great. We've got an amazing writer, and we've been developing on it now for 4 years. I think that Seth and his producing partner Evan are two huge comic fans, and the producing team we have between them and Matt Tolmack and Sony, who I've been working with now for 6 years, we have what I believe every ingredient to make something that's going to be every Fear Agent fan's greatest dream of what comes out the other end of it.
Perfect. Café con Kafka, Coffee with Kafka, that's his nickname. Do you believe that the single issues are long-standing, or is it everything for the trade nowadays? Okay, I think he means, do you think that the single issues can stay on their own right now, or that people writes for the trade, not really for the monthly? Are issues still accessible for new? Are single issues still accessible, do you think, for new readers, or is it better for them to buy the trades?
I do both, and it's fucking hard. Because you're still trying to end the issue on the best cliffhanger you can. Every single issue, you want to give that comic book reader the like ending where they're like, I need the next issue. But you're also trying to write for the trade, because I'm writing bigger stories. It's serialized, and that's the art of it. And I think that I don't write. I know that there are some writers who gave up on the cliffhanger per issue, and gave up on, like, yes, it's going to be in single issues, but they're entirely focused on what happens in terms of the trade of it all. I work really hard to do both for both readers, because I take, and this sounds, but I don't, whatever. This is, I genuinely respect the money and the support and appreciate the effort of anyone who drives to a comic book store to spend money on a single issue of a comic book I've written. They deserve the best work I'm capable of every single time, every single issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the good side of that is it informs, when you're just working on making every issue as good as you can, when those issues are compiled together in a trade, you have a dense bit of love with no fat on the bone, and the end result is better, because you were carrying the stress of the fire so much for every single chapter, and doing your best for the single issue reader, that when it's put together, that hopefully what comes out the other end is something that is, dense with ideas and quality and emotion.
Yeah, that's like I was thinking about, Foundation, Asimov's Foundation. The first book was published in a magazine, in parts before it was collected in a novel, and then I think the second or the third was already, directly made into a novel. And he was asked if that changed his idea, because of course the serialized every chapter was separated, so he needed to have a cliffhanger. And he said, "No, I'm still writing the same way, because I think the readers deserve the same respect in any format."
That's fascinating. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the beauty. I do feel like single issues are probably, but every generation has said they're dying. So I don't know. Long enough, but it's like trying to get anybody I know to read any of my comic books. They won't until there's a trade. And now, like when I try to push Death or Glory, everybody goes, "I'm waiting for the oversized hardcover." And I put everything out in that format. I go, so we went from people trade waiting, and now we've got people waiting for the premiere edition oversized hardcovers. And a lot of people, I get that all the time. "Oh, I wait for the big hardcovers for your work."
Yeah.
And that's fine. I appreciate the support any way it comes. But obviously the single issue format, it's for us, we were kids going to get your comics every Wednesday. And, it's a tradition steeped in doing things that people don't do anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I do wonder how the single issue thing moves into the future.
I think we are still going to have single issues, but they are not going to be monthly.
Yeah.
There's gotta be a time then when finally, companies realize if they want to keep the best artists, they need to go say, they can't do monthly. Let's just say it. You cannot have 3-4 artists in like 8 months. You just can't. You have to space the books. More pages per issue, whatever. But I don't think the monthlies can survive as monthlies. Yes, as single issues, they can as single issues, but I don't think they can survive as monthlies. Yeah, and that's why I think you made the right choice with your books and your artists, which is when it's done, it's done. You don't need to do it monthly. You need to do it right.
You need to do it right. That's the European model. I mean,
yep, that is. Yeah.
I don't want to make garbage comic books that get thrown into the hurricane and don't stand the test of time. And it's very hard because most people are rewarded for suckering the readers into thinking that they've got some big event thing happening and that this is what you have to read to be part of the big thing. And it has very little to do with inherent value. Like, as somebody who's spent the last 20 years writing, as much as I have, which is a lot of my life has been spent writing. I'm doing the best work of my life at the end of books like Low, at the end of Death or Glory, at the end of Seven to Eternity, at the end of Black Science. But comic book readers, even the people who appreciate those books, a lot of the time, unfortunately, they're more interested in the new and they're interested in the event and so you feel as a creator that taking the time to land the plane with an ending that hopefully lasts and resonates is almost a waste of time. And that voice can be real. I only can fight that voice because I wrote the last arc of Fear Agent, and I bled on it. I did the best I could to end Fear Agent, to the best of my abilities, at a time when the book was selling 3,000 copies. I just wrote it to the best of my ability to end it for me, right? And that ending resonates with people and stands the test of time, where now we've got a TV show and we've got an evergreen book that sells forever and a book that's beloved. So I try to remember that. Like, it seems like nobody's out there, but they are. And you have to make sure that it doesn't matter if it ships on time. It matters that it's amazing, and then you'll see the results into the future.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's the future of the industry. It's gotta be. Stop worrying about it being monthly. Worry about being good every month. That's the only way to grow for superheroes or whatever.
I agree. Can you think about if everything was handled like you were trying to do, superhero comic books with only top tier, and that wasn't monthly, and you didn't change artists? Like the way that we're doing things at Image Comic Books. If Greg Tokini and I had been supported and rewarded financially enough to do 26 issues, like we've done on Low, of any corporate superhero, you would have something that would absolutely stand the test of time and elevate that IP.
Yeah.
But that's just not the way things are done.
But it's gotta be, in a way. You can't have Uncanny X-Men every month, but you can have Uncanny in a month and X-Men in the other, or X-Force in the other. You have to be. If you don't go for the quality, those properties in a monthly, they're gonna suffer and they're gonna die sooner or later.
But they just keep doing what they've been doing. It doesn't,
Yeah,
they're
machine stop. That's true.
The quality will go down. They'll end up just selling them in Walmart. It'll go the other way with the corporate comic books, and anybody who wants, quality. Image is going to take over. Mm-hmm. The market share of Image, as more and more people get burned out. The new generation that's over there now, I know that they're going to start coming back over. And I know that the people who went back over because they think they have to raise their profile, they realize that it doesn't raise your profile. And it's you don't need to sit there and grind out like a Jack Kirby character. If Jack Kirby had just ground out DC characters, then there would be, nothing new for them to be doing with these Jack Kirby characters to begin with. But Jack Kirby lost it all to a corporation that treated him like dirt. So we've all learned. Now just get away from it. If you got to go there and build your name, or if you got an itch, go, I just wanted to write Cyclops or whatever. Fine, go write Cyclops. Scratch the itch, come back to create your own, and spend your life building a library of your own work.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I appreciate that people needs to get some financial security,
Totally.
DC, and then you go back and do your own stuff because you have the money or whatever, or even the name recognition you needed. So if it's good for everybody and if it benefits, Marvel and DC are going to keep cranking and finding new names. So if this benefits both sides, so be it. I just want people to benefit in both sides,
Yeah, and that is the other side of it. That stuff's not going away, and they do find new talent, and they do give people a paycheck, and there's a lot of positives in the industry where we need a Marvel and DC that are healthy. We need a healthy Marvel and DC. I am jaded and old, and I don't want to work in that system, but I am still obviously, aware that it is a necessary system that I utilize to build my name, and that other people have as well, and that it offers a steady paycheck. I'm bewildered by people that could leave and don't, but that's me.
Yeah, but there's people, as I said before, who are just crazy fans, and that's what they can do. And then have conversations with them about that, like literally, as you just said, like with his face, like, you have every chance to leave, and you finally realize, even if it's not for you or me, it's like unfathomable. You finally realize after 3 hours, just knocking on the same wall, like, wait, they don't see the other side. This is just what they want to do.
It's so true. And we've all got opinions. I look at that as a waste of life and a waste of a human's expression. Yeah. To constantly be taking Jack Kirby and Stan Lee characters and Steve Ditko designs and just rehashing them is like, take the chance to do what you are and create your thing, not just nostalgia for your childhood. I get it. Nostalgia is powerful. But if you've done that and you've got a name, the people that just keep putting all their time and energy into rehashing Iron Man's got a new armor, and you're like, just let the kids come in and do that. Let the next generation have their say. Go on and find what's your thing. Like, create your thing.
Yeah,
there's arguments either way, and people can say that it's easy for me to say, but it's not. I put my money where my mouth is, and I have for 23 years.
No, go, please. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I get passionate about that one aspect because I feel like the industry is regressing in some ways, and everybody's returning to, making their own stuff to go like, well, I got my hands on, Blue Beetle or fucking whatever. And you go, oh, okay. I just look at everything I did for Marvel as a sacrifice made to build an audience, and to make a paycheck, and that everything I've done that's a creator-owned property, those are like the real books. That's what matters. Yeah. That's what my kids one day I could say, like, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, maybe my kids could read those things and see different aspects of me in them. Yeah.
No, by the end of the day, as you said, it's just, and it's also healthy to just say, I played in somebody else's sandbox. Now I need to build my own world.
Yeah.
It's just healthy, because if you keep playing in somebody else, at least for me, and again, as I said, I'm just this, it couldn't be healthy, to be all my life telling somebody else's stories, because something, the bug would be itching me all the time in my back saying, hey, when are you going to tell your own fucking story? Stop.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that why you become a writer? I mean, like, do you want to be a parrot your whole life, or do you want to be a songbird? And like, that sounds flowery as fuck, but I think that at the end of the day, what you're trying to say there is that, are you going to just keep, like, you're a human being with thoughts and emotions, and I see guys and gals and people going, and they'll express all this personal stuff on Twitter, and they have things to say and they have passions, but then they just go off and they just keep rehashing the same old Marvel and DC shit with their lives. And I go, well, okay, life is short. If that's where you wanted to spend it, I can't fault you, but I would like to at least have more.
Yeah, I would like to hear your voice.
Yeah.
Not your voice put in a context where you cannot really express it. Yeah,
that's right. That's exactly.
Okay, Jeremiah Bailey says, how do you keep your... This is a good one. How do you keep your dystopias distinct? Law is different from Seven to Eternity, which is also different from Last Days of American Crime, or Tokyo Ghost, etc.
I didn't realize I'd written that many dystopias.
I didn't say it.
I once had it explained. I read a book that said imagination only exists in humans because we needed a way to predict the future to prepare for it. And so I believe that dystopic stories come out of a human desire to predict the future so that I can avoid it. Only in the cases of things like Low, in whatever it is, 600 million years, the sun will expand into a red dwarf. Maybe I'm getting my timeline wrong. Anyway,
how many times did you say?
I think it was 600 million years.
I think it's 150. But anyway, yes.
Anyway, but
let's say more or less.
The sun will expand into a red dwarf and consume the Earth. That will happen.
Yep.
Tokyo Ghost, technological addiction is happening. The Arctic shell is melting. Ocean levels are rising. That's happening. Mm-hmm. Last Days of American Crime, I wrote in 2002. Right after 9/11, and I saw the government trying to take all our liberties away, and out of fear of crime. And I thought, well, if they had a mind control ray, they'd use it. And I wrote that book. I think that when you go through each one of those, Seven to Eternity is about the evil of self-interest, mm-hmm. and how we all end up compromising our integrity and our values because of what we consider to be pragmatism, but in fact it is self-interest. And the villain, the Mud King, the God of Whispers, he represents the people who give us these deals, and the story is about somebody and how they inch along the road of compromise, even though they tell themselves it's for the better of themselves and the family. There's always something a little uglier and selfish behind it all. Anyway, so it's really just comes out of the character and about what you want to say, I think.
Chas MR says, I love your job, Mr. Remender. I guess he means I love your work. Only a couple questions. What's your favorite genre? Fantasy, science fiction, superheroes? Do you have any? Which one of them, and which one of them that you haven't written yet would you like to do as soon as possible?
I like mixing genres now. So like the Scumbag, for example, is sort of like, what if the Big Lebowski or Matthew McConaughey from Dazed and Confused, when he grows up, was given a super soldier serum. And so you take you take McConaughey's like, all right. And you give that guy the super soldier serum and you put him in a 007 movie, or you take the Big Lebowski and you put him in a 007 movie. Like I like mashing things up. That, Deadly Class is very much the same thing. It's very much me wanting to do Reagan youth, slice of life punk rock stories, and the High School for Assassin as a metaphor for the dangers of growing up. So I think that really for me, it's about finding the mix-ups more than just going like, I want to do a Western. Like, I want to do a Western, but I want the Western to be a commentary on something that's happening now. I want to do a crime story, but I want that crime story to be a commentary on something that's happening now. I think that really is where it excites me. And a lot of the time, like what the next 3 things I'm working on, the next books I have coming out, they all amalgamate a lot of different things together and hopefully create something new.
But I think that the age of pure genre, died in the 70s. I think with when all those guys, Spielberg, Lucas, Coppola, Scorsese, etc., and the Nouvelle Vague in France, etc., whatever you want to call it, in Spain after Franco with Almodovar and all those, the pure genre disappeared, and it became a lot of guys who grew up getting a lot of their, information or education, whatever you want to call it, with different genres. You realize as a writer too, it's not about the genre. It's about how can you mix them and make them work, right?
Sure. And you look at Evil Dead Part 2. Tell anybody to watch Evil Dead Part 2 in the 80s who wasn't even into horror or whatever. You go, no, it's funny. It's clever. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a mashup of B-movie sensibility, and then it does get actually scary and serious. It's all these things. It's James Cameron's Aliens meets Ridley Scott's Alien. It's big and loud, and then it's also sort of like creepy and weird. And it's imaginative, and it's Sam Raimi just doing Sam Raimi. And that's not strictly a horror movie. So you do start to see in the 80s, the stuff that I was raised on predominantly.
Yeah.
You start to see Ghostbusters is a real structure. By the end of it, New York is actually under threat. It's just by a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And there's something about that asinine, abstract silliness that then takes the serious structure that is beautiful. And that's a lot of the inspiration for the Scumbag. It's a real sort of espionage story, but then I'm throwing, Matthew McConaughey or the Big Lebowski in as the lead.
I can't wait to read it. Just when you said Matthew McConaughey as 007 in Dazed and Confused, you just sold me on it. So I'm all for it. Let me see. What can you expect from Scumbag? Well, he just said it, so we're going to go with another one. She said, Dante Cogrotti says, when are you? No, you should become one of the Image Comics partners.
Well, I mean, like those guys work. And I talk to Kirkman and Stevenson all the time, and I have ideas, and I try to help out the company, and I believe the company is a force for good in the world. And I would not exist as I do were it not for the way that Image Central was held together by people like Eric Stevenson and Eric Larson and Robert Kirkman. And I think that there's a lot of value and I think that they'll change the industry and entertainment by giving creators control over their own work. They did give me a studio, so Giant Generator is a studio, and we do have some big announcements of some plans. So I have all of the benefits, and they treat me wonderfully, and I have an exclusive contract, and I couldn't be happier. But those guys like Robert, he takes calls and he's working. That's not just as a partner in Image. He's not just going like, now it's time for my paycheck. He is actively working all the time and dealing with a lot, marketing sessions and planning and helping creators. And, I think that in terms of like where I'm at right now, curating what I have planned for Giant Generator, working my overall, because you have to understand, like, my job is now hugely developing television from my properties, and the Sony contract is 3 years, and it's a big deal that is taking up a lot of time. Between that and my own books and curating Giant Generator, having any real hand and helping out with Image as a partner, I'm not sure that I could take that on, nor has it been offered. I think that I think that house is pretty full.
Yeah, they have enough people there. Do you see yourself ever leaving comics?
Like right now, what I'm doing is about what I want. Like, I'm ending Low. I'm ending Seven to Eternity. I just ended Death or Glory. I just ended Black Science, and now I'm working on the Scumbag and Deadly Class, and and then I've got 3 books that I'm developing that are all have all drifted into next year, fortunately. And it turned out that was good because I needed a little bit of a break, and I like to space these out, So those are the things I'm working on right now, with the focus being like, we've got the last 4 issues of Seven to Eternity. Jerome has spent like 15 months on, and Matt Hollingsworth is like spending a day per page. It's insane what these guys have done, and so I want to make sure that I have the wherewithal and the presence of self to land those planes and make those books long lasting and worth the time and energy. And then like I said, I'm developing 2 TV shows and a movie, and then I'm writing the other 2 books, the ongoing Scumbag and Deadly Class. That for me right now, at least for the next year or so, feels like a really nice balance.
It's like you don't have enough on your plate for people to want you to become a partner on Image and do more books and more TV shows. Guys, he has a life and a family. You know what? Even if you don't believe it, as I always say, family is first.
It always is. And so that's been the weird thing about the pandemic, is that, my kids their only social time is on the devices, and, we've all been locked in the house together since, the beginning of March, but I love it. Like my daughter's 11 and my son's 9, and I love it. I like, we're all together all the time, every meal. They're not rushed out to school in the morning, and then I don't see them till they come home from whatever sport they did after school, and they're tired and cranky. I see them all day, and it's recentered a lot of what I think, in terms of my value system. And I know that it's looking at the upshot of a pandemic, but I certainly have enjoyed.
No. I completely agree. My daughter, 6-year-old, our daughter Erin, and my wife. Of course, he's working, distance working. They've been here, of course, same thing since March. And I gotta say the same thing. I fucking love it. It's not that I see my kid at 5 p.m. when she comes back from school, or my wife, who comes from work at like 5, 6. It's like I see them here every day, all day. And next week, finally school is coming back. So my kid is going to school, and my wife is going back to the, trying to go back to the office, secure what this is secure enough to go. And I'm fucking hating it because I want them home. I become so used to have my family at home, since March to now, that now it's like, in a week they're going back to, we're going back to routine. And I'm like, I hate it. I love to have them here and, have lunch, have dinner, have the kid around at all times. Even if she interrupts me how this is. Even if she interrupts me every 2 minutes.
Yep.
I'm not so fucking going to miss it in a week.
I'm right there with you. That aspect of it when it goes back to normal and they leave again, it'll break my heart because I love having them around.
Anyway, we have been here for 2 hours and 20 minutes. We have more questions. Do you want to continue a bit, or do you want to come back to your life?
Let's do 2 more, and then let me move on to eating some food and trying to get some exercise.
Okay, so let me see. Jeremiah Bailey says, do you have any favorite mangas? Have you had a chance to check out Chainsaw Man? If you haven't, it's very worth your time.
I've just been recommended Berserker and Chainsaw Man. I'll put on my list. I mean, like, I'm boring and I'm Gen X, so I'm just going to say you can't touch Akira. I'm just going to go with the staple on that one. You know, like there's Ghost in the Shell and all of the staples. I'm a kid of the 80s, and you know, like Akira, you just can't beat it. At least, you know, Blade the Immortal, you know, and Lone Wolf and Cub, and those were the things that I was ingesting from that era. But I think Akira is still by and far the thing that when you look at it and get into it, talk about pacing, you know, the sort of long form and the amount of immersion that you're allowed in that world is just magic.
Yeah. Have you ever read Naoki Urasawa's work, Monster, 20th Century Boys?
I have 20th century. Is it 21st Century Boys or 20th?
It's 21st. No, it's 20th Century Boys, and then the second part is 21st Century Boys.
I have 2 of those, and I found them to be difficult in terms of getting into them. I need to go back. I had this was recently recommended to me, which is just purely slice of life.
That's incredible. That's my favorite. My top 3 creators in the whole world history of comics. Jiro Taniguchi. I always recommend this. If you can, before this one, before The Walking Man, you should try to find the Diary of My Father.
Okay.
My Father's Diary.
As well.
Which is the story of him, of a guy going back to his village with a lot of preconceptions about who his father was, because he left when he was a teenager, you know, thinking his father was a nobody, and then how as an adult he realizes who his father was, and you know everything he missed because of his preconceptions about how life should be. You know, it's everything Taniguchi is slice of life, really, really deep, like deep in a hurtful way, and I mean it. You know, like it seems like it's very Japanese in the way that there's no he doesn't pull any punches.
Yeah, it's honest.
It's gonna hurt. It's like a knife to your heart.
Yeah, no, that's what I love. That was my goal with Deadly Class. That same kind of storytelling. I will definitely check it out.
Okay, so and the last one. How do you decide? Sorry, how do you decide to proceed with a project? Do you have a collaborator in mind before you start and write to their interest? Well, that part was answered before, so we'll keep to the other one. Or do you come to the artist, which is, I think, the answer? Do you come to the artist with fully fleshed out ideas and then present them to the artist you think is gonna fit the project?
Yeah, I mean, like ideas come to you when you're in the shower. They come to you when you're driving. They come to you when you're eating. They come to you when you're watching TV. You know, when the ideas come, I keep a morgue, and I just put all the ideas in the morgue, and then inspiration will hit you to open the morgue, and you'll start picking away at the ideas. And as you develop them, I have right now a morgue of like 20 ideas, like paragraphs, like, you know, fully fleshed out, kind of like the basic, you know, foundation for a story. And so I'll talk to an artist and I'll kind of feel out what they're looking to draw. And then dependent upon that, I'll take some of those ideas and I'll go, well, look, I've got something like this. What do you think? And so a lot of times I'm pitching to the artist about what they're going to get excited about. And then I take that and develop it, and we work together to, you know, kind of come together on the visual approach and the story, and then develop it up and then eventually make it. But if the artist isn't, you know, if they're not, I don't if they're not like excited and like, oh, that's what I want to do, then we don't do it. You know,
Yeah. By the way, somebody else is saying the same thing I wanted to tell you. You cannot read 21st century boys without having read 20th century boys first. 20th century boys first.
Okay.
That's why it's so confusing, because it's a continuation.
Okay, it's possible I got them in the wrong order, because I've got the little collection, and I was like, I don't know what's. You get me 25 pages in, and I'm like, I don't understand what's happening.
Yeah, well, you need to see 20th Century Boys, and even more than that, I wholeheartedly recommend Monster.
Okay.
From the same creator. It's incredible, and as I said, Taniguchi for me is the master of a slice of life.
Yeah,
was because he passed away a couple of years ago. Urasawa is the master of thrillers. You know, I don't know anybody who can do a thriller in comic as well as he does in such a long-term storytelling.
Beautiful. Well, I'll add it to the list, because I definitely need more things to read. I got that, and what do I got? My pile right here that I just got was I just started this masterpiece. With some, you can't beat Ladrone. I got volumes 1 and 2 of this. I just started them. I got that book. I got The Walking Man, and then I got Ed and Sean's new book, Hope. So I got some stuff I gotta read here.
So enjoy it. Anyway, guys, I promised him 2 questions. And he didn't go past his limit. He's a saint. He had 3 to say I'm a fucking genius, and he used 3. So as you can see, he's a good man, so he deserves to go back to his family now. Please don't cut, Rick, because I want to say proper goodbye to you after I say goodbye to people. But for everybody else, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for coming back to the show. Wear your fucking mask, and see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much, Rick, for being here. Thank you.
It was a lot of fun.
And to you, we leave in like 3, 2, 1.